Okay, well, I don't want to waste much time with orientation because we have a special treat today to hear from some of our brothers and sisters as we continue our journey this summer, thinking about spiritual formation and maturity and how the church might be even more intentional, right? To equip and call us on towards Christ-likeness. As you'll recall, our series this summer has springboarded from 1 John chapter 2, where the writer poetically, in this moment, writes about three different people groups: the young children, the young men and women, and the older men and women. And by older, I mean the more mature men and women. And you heard me say nothing else. And so we've been using that passage and that idea this summer to think about the different stages of faith and faith development. I believe there are different seasons and stages of faith. Now, one thing we've been quick to point out is that it's not necessarily linear, right? We kind of move forward and around and back and to the side. And the good news is the Spirit of God is at work, guiding each of us, calling each of us to our next steps of growth. And as we thought about the existence of different seasons and stages, we've been thinking about what are things that the church can do to be more intentional to cultivate spiritual growth. So today and next week, we're going to be spending some time thinking about the more mature of these groups. And we're very grateful today to have Miss Mary Ustry and Sharon Cooper and Bob Glenn and James Sneed here sharing with us. So I put their names here in left to right order for your benefit. Hopefully most of you have met them before. What I'm hoping to do today, and what I'm looking forward to, is hearing about God's faithfulness in their lives, right? I'm eager to hear about their experiences, how God has been equipping them to bring them where they are today, but also to think about what are the needs and the challenges of those among us who are more mature in their faith formation, and how can the church and certainly our church be more intentional to care for them as well. So let me say a prayer for you guys, and then we'll begin with just going down the line. We'll start with James and go this way first. And the first thing we want to hear about is just a quick overview of your background, right? Whether you were raised in a family of faith or came to know Jesus later, how much or not you've been a part of church through your life. Just a general overview of your spiritual background is how we will begin. Make sense? Sure. So let me say a prayer and we'll start with James. Father, again, for each of these people we give you thanks. And we give you thanks because we know you have been at work in their lives throughout their entire lives. And we give you thanks and praise for who they are, who they have become, who they are becoming. And again, Father, today we invite your blessings on this time of sharing, that we may give you glory, that we may consider how we might walk alongside each other as great supportive companions as we all seek to become the image bearers you have called us to be. So through Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. All right, take it away.
Okay, so my first memory or recollection of my experience in church, I was in a little small town called Akron, Ohio. And I see myself sitting in a pew in my father's mother's church. This is a holiness church, and it's a black holiness church. So if you haven't seen that show before, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking around and I'm going, what in the world is going on in here? Had no idea what this was all about, but it was quite the experience. And I continued to go to that church until we relocated. I must have been about 3, 4, maybe 5 years old at that time. And my family, we relocated to Jacksonville, Florida, where I started attending my great-grandmother's church, which was a Church of Christ. Quite different. But what I did enjoy at that time, and I was probably 6, 7, maybe 8 years old at that time, they had a choir. Great song, sermons, good preachers. It was a great experience, and in fact, I wanted to join that church, but transportation was a problem. Where we lived, I was too young to catch the bus by myself, and my parents either working or going to church themselves, so that didn't work out. But I did eventually find a Baptist church closer to where I lived, which I went there. I attended that until I actually graduated high school. One of the interesting facts about that is that my parents, I was the oldest of 7 siblings, or there were 6 other siblings beside myself. If I didn't attend church, I had to read scriptures every Sunday to my other siblings. So that was very interesting. And my siblings at that time, before I graduated, I think my youngest sibling was about 8 or 9 years old. So once I graduated high school, of course, like many other youngsters that age, I stopped going to church. I was out in the world doing those things that people do out there in the world. But then a number of years later, I found myself in Colorado, and I found myself going back to church, and that was the Church of Christ. So that became kind of a theme, and my faith continued to grow in the church and in my faith. But then I got married to my wife there, and we left the U.S. and went overseas. She was an active duty warrant officer for the Army. We went overseas, and we got overseas. We did attend a number of different Church of Christ, but we also attended some Catholic churches. We attended some other denominational churches. We were in churches in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany. So we even went to some French-speaking churches. That was interesting. The one thing that really got my attention about it was that although they spoke a different language, the songs were all the same. The melodies were all the same, so we could participate in that. And I continued my walk in God, and I continued to grow. I continued to feel the strength of my faith moving me in a direction that I had no idea I would be moving toward. Once we came back from overseas, we wound up in upstate New York. And of course, we found the church there, so we attended church there. And I've been going to church ever since then. I mean, everywhere I've been, up with the exception of a few years during my youth, I've been at church somewhere. So I've got a lot of knowledge about the church, but I will say I really didn't understand a lot of it until probably the last 10 years of my life, where I began to really pay attention to what I was seeing around me and what the Bible was actually saying. And there's a huge contradiction in what men say and what the Bible say. So, and what I will leave you with is that the Bible tells us, don't just listen to me and read it for yourself. That's my story.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, James. Bob, how about you?
His town was much bigger than mine. I grew up in a little town in East Tennessee that had 10,000 people. I cannot remember not going to church. The Church of Christ was the only thing I remember. I do know that before I was able to remember, that was about 2 years, when I was 2 years old. My mother was not a member of the church. My mother was a member of the Church of Nazarene. And my father was Church of Christ, and my grandparents on my mother's side were not particularly happy that my mother was marrying my father. In fact, they referred to him as the Campbellite. And the church that I grew up in, my earliest memories were there were maybe 50 or 60 people there. Before I was 5 years old, we didn't even have Sunday school. We weren't meeting in a church building per se. We were meeting in a building that was a small theater for the local theater guild. And this building was in such disrepair. The windows didn't have glass in them. You could throw a cat through the window, and it was not air conditioned. The air conditioning came from the fans that were from the local funeral home that had been stuck in the seats before we came together. But we didn't have Sunday school because there were no classrooms, and the church had a minister that he was. I would say he was a very honest man and a very godly man, but he was not as trained as what we experience today. He got most of his education by listening to others in the pulpit, and he decided that's what he wanted to do. He was convicted for that, he baptized my mother in a creek when I was 2 years old. There was no baptismal facilities inside that theater. So when I was about 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 6, we built a building there in downtown Morristown on one of the 2 main streets that were in that town. And it was just up the block from the very large Baptist church. They probably had 1,000 people there at least every Sunday. And remember, there's only 10,000 people in that town, so they were by large the most active group. The second most active was about 3 more blocks further to the east. That was the Methodist church. And then you had all of these little bitty churches that had broken off from this Baptist church here. They were not the only ones that had that problem. And the church was so small, the only person that we had there that was professional was the minister, and he was part-time, and he was not funded by the local congregation. He had to go, much as the missionaries do, to go get support from wherever he could get it. When I went off to college, the congregation had grown to about 75 or 80 people. And you would think they would have grown more than that over a period of 16 years from the time I was little. Actually, the town didn't grow that much either. When I graduated from high school, there were 13,000 people in the city. You talk about buses. We didn't have buses. The school system didn't even have buses. You either walked to school or your parents drove you to school, and everybody lived in a very small geographic space. Stone Oak is about 4 or 5 times the geographic size of the town I grew up in. We had 3 grocery stores that kept us fed. But everything was geared upon what you can't do. You can't do this, you can't do that. I've got a list in my pocket of about 20 things that were the controversies of the day. We used the Gospel Advocate Quarterly. Those of you who grew up in the church knew that one. And the King James Version was the only authorized version of the Bible that we read. Well, when I graduated from high school, I wanted to go to the University of Tennessee to go to the School of Architecture. But my father wanted me to try to have a plan B, so I applied to the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga and ended up going there because the scholarship was more. Actually, it was twice as much. I got half of my education paid for that freshman year. It was $400. So that was half a year's tuition. Was $400. Books were more expensive than tuition. But my father drove me down to Chattanooga, and on the day that I went in, he helped me unload, and we moved into this dormitory that was built in the 1890s, and it had 6 stories tall. It was an old converted apartment building, and there were no cell phones weren't anywhere anybody's thought back in 1970, and there was one payphone on every floor of that dorm. Well, Dad left me about 12:30 on a Sunday afternoon and he told me he was going back home. But then at 3 o'clock, there's this guy out in the hallway screaming my name. He says, "You got a phone call out here." I said, "I've got a phone call on a payphone?" I said, "My grandparents lived in Chattanooga, both sets." It was my father's father on the phone. He said, "Robert, is your grandma?" He says, "I'll be over Sunday to pick you up for church. Pick you up at 8:30. We'll go to Sunday school, they'll have church, then you'll come over to the house and eat with me and Grandma. And then we'll go back to evening services, and then I'll take you back to the dorm." That was my first experience in an accountability partner. I never was allowed to experience life without going to church. When I was growing up, we were there every time the doors were open. And that was what was expected. I got off work on Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock and church started at 7:30. Mom and Dad picked me up. I didn't get supper on Wednesday. So, that's just the way it was. When I was in school, my grandfather passed away toward the end of my sophomore year. And I had moved in with an aunt after my first year in the dormitory because I just knew that wasn't the place I needed to be. It wasn't positively impacting me spiritually. So I moved in with my aunt, and my aunt lived a pretty good distance from where my grandfather was going to church. I still went there for about 5 or 6 months after he passed. But then my father bought a house in an area of Chattanooga called Brainerd, and I moved in with my aunt, and a few months later my sister joined us down there. So the first Sunday I went to church, went into Sunday school, which they were like us. They had services first and then Sunday school second. Went in there. There, behold, was a guy I was working with at the bank locally. And he was sitting next to this cute young lady. And I took particular note of her and said, "Well, that'll be a short-lived thing. He's ugly." And ultimately, that ugly friend of mine married my sister. And I married the young lady that he was with. She has been my accountability since 1972, in large part. There's not a time that we have not shared across several moves across the East Tennessee for different jobs. We always were in church. I got more stories, but how about you?
Thank you, Bob. All right, Sharon, tell us some about your background, please.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the Baptist church, and it was a small little country church in Bryan, Texas, and I spent summers and most weekends with my grandparents. Both sets of grandparents lived there, and we also were in the church every Sunday, and all the youth activities, and any time that there was something going on at the church, we were there. So years later, Alan and I decided to get married, and like I said, I had grown up in that church. My grandmother had been married in that church. My mother had been married in that church. But Alan was from the Church of Christ. And his family really felt very strongly that, you know, we'd be a part of the Church of Christ. That was important to them. And it seemed like a good decision because it was important to them, and really what was important to my folks was that we worship God and that we were a part of a church. So that's what we decided to do. Well, for our marriage, there was no question I wanted to be married in the little church that my mother and my grandmother had been married in. As a matter of fact, I even wore my mother's dress. But we decided that we should have a Church of Christ minister marry us in honor of Alan's family. And so we went to the one of the Churches of Christ there in College Station, and we talked to the minister there. And that was really it was my absolute first encounter with the Churches of Christ. And he told me that in order for him to marry us, that I would need to be rebaptized before he would do the ceremony. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was also very young and also very stubborn. And but I was also very convicted about my faith. And so after much discussion, and I mean much discussion, I finally point blank asked him, so are you telling me that my two grandmothers who taught me to love Jesus and modeled being a Christian woman are going to burn in hell because they weren't baptized in the Church of Christ? And he said, after a few seconds of hesitation, pretty much. And those words are embedded in my mind today. Well, we left, and but somehow Alan went back and somehow convinced this minister to marry us in my little family church. And that's what we did. And I'll fast forward now to many years later. We are now in San Antonio, and Alan's daddy, we lost his daddy, and we moved his mom in with us. And she lived with us for nearly 30 years. And the church was extremely important to her. Faith was important to us, but church had not been important to us. So we started going every Sunday and taking Alan's mom to church, and to a church local here, Church of Christ. And we decided that as a family of four, which was my daughter Megan at that time, she was 4 years old, and my mother-in-law and Alan and me, we would join that church. And we did. And several months passed, and they decided to get name tags. Now, I don't remember if these name tags were the first time they ever had them, or if their name tags had gotten old, so we were replacing them. But we didn't have any name tags, our family of four. So a Sunday came that you were supposed to go, you signed up for them, or I don't remember how the process was, but the Sunday came that we were all supposed to go into this fellowship room and pick up our name tags. Well, we got out to the car because we were headed to lunch and said, oh, we forgot to pick up our name tags. I said, oh, no problem, I'll just run back in and get them. So I did. And the room was very crowded, but the lines weren't long, but there were a lot of people standing around fellowshipping like we do in the church. And I made my way to the front of the room where they had the table set up, and sure enough, all the name tags were there alphabetically filed. And I went to pick up our name tags, but there were only three. There was Alan's and Megan's, who was 4 years old, and his mother. And mine wasn't there. So I said, I guess I was looking to see if it was misfiled. And the lady behind the table said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, my name tag doesn't seem to be here. I was looking for it." She goes, "Oh, what's your name?" Just real friendly. And she gets her notebook and looks in it. And she says, "Oh, just a minute," as she looked at me very sympathetically. And I thought, So she goes and she brings an elder back. And the elder tells me there at the table that I don't have a name tag because I was not a baptized member of the Church of Christ, which was my second encounter. And so, he did offer to baptize me, and I declined, as I had the first time around, because I didn't need to be rebaptized.
We're glad you're still here.
So, I held my head high. Of course, in my mind, everyone had stopped talking and all eyes were on me. I'm sure that's not really how it was, but that's how I felt that day. And I held my head high, fought back the tears, and got out of the room. And that could have easily been the end of my story. But it wasn't, because I had Alan, and he was so determined I was going to be a part of his church. So, shortly after that, my company that I worked for wanted us to relocate to New Jersey. Wow, that was a long way from home. But we did. And when we looked for a home, we wanted first to find a home that had the right schools, because Megan was going to start kindergarten there. And we wanted it to be a good school, and we wanted to have a Church of Christ for Alan and Megan and his mom, because that was important to her. And it was important to us that we bring our daughter up in the church. But I wasn't planning on going. So Alan went to that church, and he met with the church leadership, and there was one of the two elders in this very small little church. His name was Gene Cook. And he is my impressionable person in my life with my faith walk here. Because he came to our home and he sat with us and he said, "Tell me about your baptism." No one had asked me that. "Tell me about your baptism. Tell me about your faith." And we had the most wonderful discussion. And he said, "You hear me when I tell you that when you are ever asked this question again, you respond, 'I was baptized in Christ's church,' and you will never have this situation again." And Alan and I joined that church there in Chatham. And they put us to work right away. I was even asked to teach children's Bible class. I couldn't believe it. And my heart was full. We were there for 2 years, and my company brought us back to San Antonio. And we were going to find a church home. And to say that I was a little nervous, but we decided that we would visit multiple churches. We weren't going to make any commitments to a church. We were just going to go and kind of see how it went. And we came here. And I can't tell y'all what happened when we got here. There was no question this was our church home. And that was back in 1992. I still remember the first day. I remember the next time and the next time. These people, a lot of people who are still here today, and some new faces, welcomed us, and we were just part of this family. We even had our second daughter the first year we were back here. And this church did a piggy bank shower for us. I couldn't even believe it. We were brand new. Nobody should have even known us. And we were so blessed from the time that we were here. So I'm very grateful for Gene Cook in New Jersey. I'm very grateful for the Chatham Church of Christ, and I'm very thankful for Northside and all of the people who have been on our walk with us here.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, Mary.
I see now why Jim Martin kind of had us on this panel after hearing Sharon's story. So I'll try to be quick. I know my parents were not church-going people. My father was not a believer, and my mother was a believer, and had stopped taking me to church as a little girl because where she went to the Baptist church, they were uncomfortable with her going with her husband, not with her. And she felt like every time she went to church, she was defending an action. So she stopped going altogether in her life. But she had been raised by my grandmother and grandfather, but my grandfather never darkened a church door, but my grandmother encouraged, you might say coerced, my grandfather to donate the property that they own next to their home to the Baptist church. And then she helped create the Baptist church in Port O'Connor, Texas. You've probably never heard of. But she started the Baptist church in Port O'Connor, Texas. So when I went to visit my grandmother, who I loved more than I can express, when I visit her in Port O'Connor on holidays and summers, I would go to the Baptist church with my grandmother and sit in the nursery and watch her rock the babies in the nursery and go to the church and sing the songs. But the thing that impressed me was when she was home and I was a little girl and she'd be cleaning house, she'd be sweeping the front porch, I remember, and she would sing, I'm gonna let you help me. She would sing, I come to the garden alone, and he walks with me, and he talks with me. And she'd be running the vacuum in the house, and she'd be singing, on a hill far away, old rugged cross. And I was just a little kid, and I heard these songs on repeat through the years. And I saw the joy in this woman, a joy that I didn't see in my home. But boy, she was bursting with it. And we got along like two best friends. And I looked at her and I thought, I want what she's having. And by the time I was about 13, I had some high school friends who took me by the arm to their Baptist church. And I was baptized in the Baptist church when I was 13. And then when I was 18, I started dating a boy who was a member of the Church of Christ. And y'all know what boys who are a member of the Church of Christ who date girls who are Baptist girls try to do, right? Convert them. And he did. So I studied the Bible with him and with the preacher from the Church of Christ in Pasadena, Texas. And I wasn't as stubborn as Sharon. So I was rebaptized when I was 18 with a proper baptism, which broke my mother's heart, my Baptist. And she told me it hurt her feelings. But she was a real resilient woman. She bounced right back from that and didn't hold it against me. So I married a Church of Christ boy, not that one, but his relative. And, you may know his brother, Jerry Esther. Don't hold that against me. So we moved to San Antonio and went to a very conservative Church of Christ congregation here in San Antonio. And we were full in. My husband was a deacon, he was the song leader. I taught the Bible classes. I created some of the little kiddo Bible classes that they didn't have yet. And we were fully loving it, loving life, raising our children there. That was our family. And there was an elder who came to be there who had issues with anybody who didn't agree with him 100% of the time. And we, as life went on, after about 10 years, 15 there, we had some different ideas that weren't radical. We weren't even voicing them. We just had them, and this elder was our very good friend. We went on vacation with them. We were very close. But when he started understanding that we thought a little bit differently, they wanted us gone. And they wanted a lot of people gone. So the church had a split at that time. Anybody that didn't agree with this elder's way. And he said, I don't care if the only two people left are me and my wife. We're going to do it the right way here. And so I had an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old child, and I kept going to Bible class. My husband said, I can't do this nonsense. And he was a little smarter, but I kept going. So one Wednesday night I was home with the 10-year-old, and my 8-year-old daughter's best friend was the preacher's daughter. And so she went to Wednesday night services with the preacher's daughter, and they withdrew from me that night with her in the audience. And I would never have known it because they didn't tell me that they withdrew from me or ever come speak to me about that in any way. My daughter started crying and they had to take her out of the service, but she never told me when she came home. But at a later time, the preacher's wife was talking to me, and I said, what are you talking about? And she looked at me and she said, you don't know. And I didn't know. But what had happened one day was the elder called me at home. We were very good friends. He called me at home a lot, called us at our house a lot. He called me at home and he said, I just have a question for you. Do you think your grandmother, when I had just lost my grandmother that year, do you think your grandmother went to heaven? And it was such an out of the blue, odd question. And I said, well, if anybody goes to heaven, I think she did. And come to find out, that was the week after that I was withdrawn from. So that came about, and
What is withdrawing?
It's fellowship.
This fellowship.
that means the leadership got up and said, this person is no longer a member here, and we are withdrawing our fellowship from her. So what that meant for me was that I was no longer allowed to be in social situations with these people. So when I was the maid of honor in my friend's wedding, some of the members of the congregation would not come to the wedding because I was there. I was not invited to my best friend's baby shower when she had her baby because I was withdrawn from it. So this actually, I am a very resilient human, I've found in these years of life. My husband is not. This just about broke him when this happened. Just about. And he grew up in the Church of Christ, and this was his church family. And he was connected to that in a different way than I was. I have always been connected to Jesus. Jesus, as we sang, is my firm foundation. Although I love Christians and I love a church family, it's not my firm foundation. People are people. We're all unwise at times, and people disappoint you, but Jesus doesn't. And so after we left there, we licked our wounds with about 15 people in a home church for a while, and then we went to Oak Hills for about 20 years. And at the COVID time of life, we found our way over here, and we're still limping, I would say, as far as being all in and being members. I don't know that my husband will ever place membership again anyway, which is okay. His faith is strong. His faith is strong, but his faith in churches is not. So here we be, and we're thankful.
Sure. Thank you. We're glad you're here.
Glad you're here.
We are very glad you're here. I appreciate all of you telling us some about your background, and even some very dark moments from your background. It's very honoring to us that you would share that. And I am sorry for the pain and the horrific things that have been said to you.
God has turned it for good. God does that.
He does. Okay. So I want to think then, let's focus our attention, if we can, a bit on being more mature in the faith. So these answers could be a little shorter, please. I'm curious. just because we have several great questions that I'd like to get to. So just a couple minutes each. What has been most beneficial in your own faith development? Is it a particular person who invested in you? Is it a particular experience? Is it classes? Is it spiritual practices? Was it a retreat or a trip or an overbrought, right? Just what are a couple of things that you would say have contributed the most to your faith formation? Who wants to go first? Okay, anyway.
The first verse I memorized was Romans 10:17. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And I believe that. Believe it. I believe it. But there are lots of ways to hear. You can hear with words by reading your Bible. You can hear people's words. You can hear people's lives. You can hear praise songs. And they all have messages. But I think we have to have ears to hear. And I think that's how my faith has developed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sharon, go ahead.
As I thought through this, there's a lot of different ways, but I think probably being a mother and bringing up my two daughters in the church and teaching them. You know, when you teach, you learn. And when you model, it becomes muscle memory. And so bringing up my two daughters was a lot of my growth personally, and Alan and me with our daughters as a family, serving and teaching. I can look around. But I think even more so now is watching my daughters as they've grown up, who they've become and how different from what we taught them. So much more new, fresh perspectives on things that really shouldn't be hard for me after my journey, right? To have a fresh perspective. But yeah, I think that's where I grow now, is watching my two daughters, Megan in her tremendous faith through such difficult times, and Lindsay with her faith through service and the care of others. And how inclusive both of my girls are to others. I mean, Lindsay will almost pick out a person who is on the edge because she wants them to be included. So they teach me, and so that's mine.
Thank you very much.
When I went to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, it was the fall of 1970. And so I was somewhat concerned about the classes I'd take. The school was new to the University of Tennessee system. In 1969, in December, it became part of the University of Tennessee system. Before that, it was a Methodist, private Methodist university. And when I got there, it still had a lot of the faculty that were associated with the Methodist Church and with the old school. And so I felt like if I signed up for classes like Introduction to Old Testament, Introduction to New Testament, Primitive Religions, I was going to be okay because I didn't talk it right. The man that probably got me to open my eyes more to the contradictions of what was going on within the congregations I had been associated with was this old Methodist minister who taught those classes. He gave us a Bible that had more books in it than the 66. And we read it in class. And he was serious about what he was doing. He did not try to indoctrinate me into anything that was Methodist per se. He says, what does it say? What does it say there? And he got me into reading the scriptures for what they were and looking at different versions of the Bible and trying to understand how, he says, you know, we don't know a lot of stuff here. There was a lot of stuff that took place back before the 400 when all those people were there who had written the scriptures that are in the New Testament. He says, we've got this gap, and I don't know why there seems to be inconsistencies there. And I noticed that we were inconsistent from congregation that I went to. We were inconsistent in applying the rules that I grew up with. It caused me to want to read more. It caused me to find people that I trusted within congregations I was associated with as we moved around the state. And I would try to find someone that I trusted and who were believers. I was exposed to a lot of different things. I guess where I am today can best be summed up in a quote that I heard in the old movie Rudy. You know, about the guy that wanted to play football at Notre Dame. He was concerned about where he was and not having his prayers answered about that. And he went to this Catholic priest, and the priest told him, he says, you know, I've been in this religion thing for a long, long time. He says, I'm only sure about two things. He says, I believe there's a God, and I know I'm not him. I think that is where I am today because I continually read it, trying to find fresh eyes. Sometimes I get myself in trouble because I will go off a little of a tangent and Bruce will catch me and break me back in. Or I guess the guy I listen to most right now is Doug Foster. I go to him with some regularity about my questions. But I think we have a responsibility to read and try to understand it for what Jesus said and the context. So I'm pretty well open to a lot of different things, and probably some of you may not be.
Thank you.
So I guess the most influential person in my life is my wife. She has meant everything to me. She is my rock. Without her, I honestly couldn't say or wouldn't know where I would or might be going today. Prior to her, I had some real issues with the church, and not any particular church, just with the church or Christians. Because what I had seen over my life prior to that was basically a bunch of money-grubbing men seeking power. And what I saw in that was false teachings, influencing people in the wrong way, just for an individual's personal greed. But when I met my wife, and that was in Colorado, I got baptized at Lakeside Church of Christ in Colorado. And the preacher there was very influential to me as well. Now, over the course of my life, I've had a lot of influential people in my life, a lot of men and women. Some of the women I worked for or worked with, same thing with the men. But I really had some eye-opening moments somewhere around 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, but where I actually started rereading the Bible for context and trying to get an understanding of what was actually in there versus what I had been hearing. And that drove me to not just read one Bible, but to read different Bibles. And I have a collection of different Bibles now. I also, the latest one I have is the Ethiopian Bible, which figuring out that why is the Western Bible only 66 books when the oldest Bible known to man has 88? Who's taking stuff out of the Bible? Who's making these changes and why? So I have some serious questions even right now today. But I have I'm grounded in my faith. I know who Jesus Christ is. But even there, I have questions. And I'm still growing. I haven't gotten there. I'm still prone to diving off the deep end. But I'm still learning.
Appreciate that, James. Yeah. Okay, probably the last question we have time for today. In this season of your walk, what would you say are your primary spiritual and relational needs? In this season of your maturity in your life, what are your primary spiritual and relational needs?
Well, I'll start off, I guess. Acceptance, tolerance, community, friendship, mentorship, things that I would expect the church to provide, truth in teaching, scripture. I think those are the things that top my list as far as what I would expect from my church.
Thank you.
I think that the key of what I think the church needs is we need to have a different view of unity. We need to be forgiving of people's differences, and really, they don't matter. We're not going to be the ones that should be judging folks. We need to understand that people can be just as convicted in their beliefs as we are in ours, and that we should set those things aside. I have relatives that are members of the Methodist Church, that are in the Baptist Church. I can go in good faith and worship with them just as good as I can with this body here. Not because I think there's any less of the congregation at Northside. In fact, it's just the opposite. I find us trying to strive toward be more united in our appeal and in our recognition of what the Lord's Word is. So I think that the best thing we can do is just stay in the Word.
So I would come back to say that I think I would love to see the church embrace change if it brings other people to Christ. The churches, and I know the Baptist Church does too, but the churches of Christ where I have been a part of now most of my life is steeped in tradition, and they're beautiful traditions, but other churches, talking about the unity, are also steeped in their own traditions. And I think that if we as a church body continue to try and reach the community by, and if we have to change a little bit to do that, I hope that we'll do that. That's my hope for the church.
Well, I would say I agree with you. I would say that. I agree with just what you said. As far as your question of what our needs are, I find at this time of life, I have fewer needs. My group of Christians that I've maintained to this point in life is pretty strong and steady, and what I feel most strongly about, and this may be the old educator in me, but the thing that encourages me the most and I feel the most strongly about in a congregation like this is what's going on with the kids and the youth. This summer I have seen in a church this size, to see so many young people from the youth group baptized in just a few months. It just makes me think things are going well in that way. It looks to me like it's a strong program, and I think that's where the focus needs to be. That's the future. There you're teaching folks right there in the building. So I guess to just add that little bit to what Sharon just said, because I like those thoughts.
Anything else from the four of you before we close? I feel mixed right now because I really appreciate what you guys have shared, and there are so many more questions that I wish we could ask, and I'm sure many of you have questions as well. But thank you very much for sharing today. Thank you for telling us some about your background, what brings you to where you are, and the questions and wonderings that are on your minds and your hearts today. It means a lot to us. So would you join me in expressing some gratitude to them?
I'd just like to affirm you
Yes.
and say, and this is one of the best Bible classes I've ever been in, including many I taught myself. And so I'm just grateful for you all, and thank you for organizing it this way, Ryan.
Well, Jim has organized most of it. Yes, Greg.
Hey, James, and when you keep asking those questions, when you find out those answers, will you let us all know?
I'll be shouting it from the rooftop.
Okay, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll be back next week to unpack some of the things that we heard today. So look forward to that conversation. Bye-bye.